Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, and today we officially begin my top 100 board games of all time. A few days ago, for those of you who missed it, we posted my numbers 110 to number 101 board games of all time. That is the games that just barely missed the official top 100. But today we begin the top 100 proper. So without any further ado, let's get straight to my number 100, which is Riverboat, designed by Michael Kiesling and published by Mayfair Games. And this is one of 35 new board games to my list this year. That is games that are new to me that I played for the first time in 2021. And Riverboat here is a cool game that takes place in the upper Mississippi setting, where players have their own player boards, which basically consists of some farmland. And in this game, you have a bunch of different phases. In one phase, you're placing down workers to cover particular hexes on your farm field. And it's all dependent on these random cards that are flipped over. And all players have to place their workers, particularly on regions that match those farms. But there are ways of breaking that rule, because you have coins. And if you spend coins, you might be able to place a worker in any terrain of your choice. But those coins are hard to come by, so you're gonna have to choose wisely when to use that. Later on in future phases, you're gonna be planting crops and harvesting said crops. You're gonna be going to the port here and purchasing different or paying for different riverboats in order to have transactions with them and in order to score victory points. Ultimately, you're trying to score victory points. This game plays pretty quickly. It's only 4 rounds. If you're playing 2 players, it plays at a really rapid clip, but it does accommodate all the way up to 4 players. Really neat. I like the mechanisms in this game. I like the simplicity, but at the same time, the strategic aspects of this game. My number 100 board game of all time, Riverboat. And now we move on to my number 99. And my number 99 board game of all time is Tiny Epic Tactics by Scott Almes. And again, I am a big fan of Scott Almes and Tiny Epic Games and Gamelin Games here. And this game here, really neat game from a gimmick perspective. The game is pretty solid, but more so is the gimmick that stands out, because inside this box you have a bunch of these additional smaller boxes, and with these boxes, along with the little terrain map that comes rolled inside of here, you're going to be creating a 3-dimensional terrain. And it's really cool because you got the small little meeples representing your band of heroes. Each player is going to control a band of heroes, of 4 different heroes from different classes. And you're going to be moving through these different terrains and navigating them. So climbing a terrain might have some challenges to it. If you shoot a ranged weapon like a bow from an elevated level to an enemy that's below, you're going to have a little bit of an advantage, a little bit of a vantage point. So your distance might go further. Really cool, really neat. You have all these different characters that you can choose from to form your band of heroes with all types of different statistics. Now, I must say, I do think that this game actually shines solo, because when you play solo, it adds an element to the game that's not there in the multiplayer game, which is whenever you go into these caves in these three-dimensional boxes here, you actually flip the box upside down, and inside of it you're going to have a maze or a dungeon that you're going to peruse, that you're going to go through to explore and try to discover different things, avoid certain traps, encounter different enemies, and ultimately gain these crystals that are the objective of the solo game. Really cool, really neat game. Again, it shines solo, and I think that the gimmick perhaps makes me like it a little more than I would like it otherwise if it were merely a 2-dimensional board. But right now, it's good enough to make it my number 99 board game of all time, Tiny Epic Tactics. Now we move on to my number 98 board game of all time, and that is Treasure Hunter. And Treasure Hunter here is designed by Richard Garfield, and this is a pick and pass card drafting game, very much akin to games like Sushi Go Party and Seven Wonders. And I'm a big fan of the mechanism, the pick and pass mechanism here. And I find this is cool because this is a fantasy themed iteration of the game. Players are basically going on different adventures. And at the beginning of each round, you randomly draw cards and put them in each of these 3 different regions. And the regions are color-coded blue, green, and red, corresponding with the different cards that players are going to be drafting and playing gain throughout the round. But it's cool because based on the treasures that you find in these different regions, that's going to determine players' objectives, players' desires to go to a particular region and gain said treasure. Now, sometimes the treasure is actually more of a curse. It's detrimental and it'll give you negative points. Therefore, you're going to want to avoid being the leader in those particular regions. But sometimes the cards that are dealt to you and therefore passed upon you as you go around in clockwise order, sometimes it's bad luck and you end up having to pick up a cursed item. Really cool, really neat. You're also factoring in that at the end of each round, you're going to have these goblins that are going to attack you and loot you for your gold, which gold contributes to your victory points. So that's something you're going to want to consider to defend yourself. And you defend yourself by drafting dogs. So you're trying to find the right balance of drafting dogs, of drafting different region cards that match the particular colors here in order to win the most prized treasures and have the most victory points at the end of the game. Pretty cool, pretty neat. Again, pick and pass card drafting with a fantasy twist. My number 98 board game of all time, Treasure Hunter. And now we move on to the number 97 board game of all time. And this game here is not new to the list, as unlike the top three that I just mentioned. Riverboat, Tiny Epic Tactics, and Treasure Hunter all were played by me for the first time last year. Pillars of the Earth, I played for the first time a few years back. It's been on the list before. That's my number 97, Pillars of the Earth. And Pillars of the Earth last year ranked number 51 on my list. So this is quite a drop down, over 40 spaces. It's dropped down. And one of the reasons why is because I did not play this game at all last year. This game is a worker placement game. As a matter of fact, it's one of the pioneers in the worker placement genre, and it's based on the novel of Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. And I'm a big fan of the TV series that was produced for Pillars of the Earth, and I love this game. I really do. The board is beautiful, designed by Michael Menzel, renowned board game artist, and the three-dimensional little cathedral that you use to set up to determine the rounds, it actually serves no other mechanical purpose other than a round marker. This serves for table presence. It really makes the board pop. When you're done with the end of the game, you feel like you built the cathedral that they were all working and striving towards to in the TV series or in the novel. But this game here, really solid mechanisms. I like the master builder phase with the worker placement, where you have to consider whether or not you want to pay money in order to get an action earlier on in the round, or whether or not you want to allow that worker to be bumped all the way to the end of the round and get his worker action for free. Really cool. I like the fact that the board, although it looks busy at first glance, is very intuitive because you simply trigger all the actions in clockwise order. I'd like to see if I could get this game to the table in 2022 and see if that affects its ranking for next year. But for now, it's my number 97 board game of all time, Pillars of the Earth. Now we move on to my 96. And my 96, another new game to the list. So far, 4 of the first 5 games this list have been new games. And that is Temporum, designed by Donald X. Vaccarino of Dominion fame. And lots of people are fans of Dominion, but not very much so fans of Donald X. Vaccarino's board game designs. I like Temporum. First of all, I think it's a very unique theme. It's a time travel theme where players are traveling from the future and they're going to different generations in the past in order to influence the past to therefore gain the most influence in the future, which would be the player's present. And although the theme sounds exciting and refreshing, I must admit that it's carried out in a very abstracted way. Players are simply playing actions and cards that allow them to maneuver their influence down these tracks here. So you got these tracks here representing the different ages, and the game is divided into 4 ages, all the way back from antiquity to medieval times to postmodern times to the future. And you're trying to move your different crown pieces, and you're doing it through simple card play. These cards here are going to grant you money, and they're going to grant you the ability to score them, which advances your influence along the different ages, and you're going to need to use the money that you gained in order to play those cards and score them. Really simple, but I think there's so much variety with all the different cards that you can use. So here's a card for the future. This is the Age of Toys, and you've got some cards here from the past. You've got the Renaissance period right here. And all of these different locations or these different times in history, when you go to them, they grant you specific actions. Here you've got ancient Egypt. And there's so many different cards here. So many different cards to mix and match and create lots of variety. And that's one of the things that Donald X Vaccarino is very strong at, and it's setup variability. He gives you so many different options to start your game, and that's something I enjoy about his designs. And so far, everybody I've played this game with has really enjoyed it, so it definitely has earned its spot as my number 96 board game of all time, Temporum. My number 95 board game of all time is Magic the Gathering, also designed by Richard Garfield. I had an earlier design by Richard Garfield on this list, Treasure Hunter. And Magic the Gathering is not new to me. I've been playing this game for several years. I do play it casually, never played it competitively or on a tournament level or anything like that. Never been much about getting boosters or what have you. Instead, I simply get these pre-made dual decks that are compatible or asymmetric, but at the same time balanced to one another to some extent. And Magic the Gathering was on my list last year as high as number 36. I think there was a time a few years back where I had it ranked in my top 20 because I really admire the brilliance of this game. The design is so neat. It's so streamlined and at the same time so rich and has so much variety, and it's really, really exciting. The collectible aspect can be a little bit of a temptation, but I personally try my best to avoid it because I already have lots of other addictions to deal with. Now, Magic the Gathering is a fun game. If you want to play it casually, there are ways to do so. If you want to get more into it, I mean, the people who play Magic the Gathering usually only play Magic the Gathering, and they very much love and adore it. And if there is a game that is worthy of that lifestyle status because of how good it is and how much it has out there and how much it has to offer, then Magic the Gathering is definitely one of those games. I did not play it at all in the entire 2021 calendar year. I only have a few people that I actually play this game with, and for whatever reason we did not connect and we're not able to play this game in 2021. We'll see if I get to play it in 2022, but for now it's my number 95 game of all time, Magic the Gathering. My number 94 board game of all time is the Castles of Burgundy, the card game, designed by Stefan Feld. And I must give a bit of a spoiler. I'm a big fan of all things Castles of Burgundy. I even enjoy the dice game quite a lot, and although that game did not make it to the top 100, but Castles of Burgundy, the card game, did. And this basically takes everything that you find in Castles of Burgundy and shrinks them down to size into this small card game. And you find inside this box all of these, tons of these Euro-sized small cards here. And basically everything that you find, every feature that you find in your estate board in Castles of Burgundy, you're going to find represented in these cards. You're going to find your cities. You're going to find your knowledge cards. You're going to find your farm cards. You're going to find your mine cards and all that stuff. And it's so neat because not only are these cards that you're going to try to be gathering in order to complete a set collection for each of these different colors, and you're trying to race and be the first person to complete it. Basically, it's just a racing game. It kind of shrinks it down a little bit to just a race within all these different colored sets. But the neat thing about this game, the really cool thing about this game, is that the dice itself, or the cards themselves, replace the dice that you find in regular Castles of Burgundy. So instead of rolling dice as a randomizer, you're going to draw cards from the deck, and whatever number you find on the top there, that's the dice number that you rolled. And that's also going to be the number that you're going to need to factor in whenever you play said card. Really, really cool. Really neat. If you're a fan of Castles of Burgundy and you want to consider a small game that travels easily, it's not necessarily a small table print, but it does travel easy. My number 94 board game of all time, the Castles of Burgundy, the card game. And now we move on to my number 93 game of all time, and that is Deadwood. And Deadwood here was on my list last year. As a matter of fact, it was number 62, so it's dropped quite a bit. Castles of Burgundy is actually holding on pretty steady. Castles of Burgundy was on my list as number 89 last year, so it only dropped a few spots. But Deadwood here is a Wild West themed worker placement game. And I think one of the reasons why it's dropped so many spots is because another game that I've played recently has kind of eclipsed it. But this game here is cool. It's neat. Basically, the game has a couple of potential endgame triggers. You're building the railroad as the game progresses. One of the actions you're doing is you're building track, and eventually you're going to be building the train station. And once the train station is built, that would trigger the end of the game. However, there are other ways to trigger the end of the game. You have this pool of wanted posters, and the wanted posters are triggered, or a player acquires wanted posters every time they initiate a duel, because there's going to be lots of dueling in this game, because whenever you go to a worker placement spot, that spot is not necessarily safe. If one of your opponents wants to place one of their cowboys onto that spot, then they're going to be able to potentially take the action of that spot if they're able to beat you in a duel. And you got 3 different types of workers with 3 different strengths, levels 1, 2, and 3, and that's going to help or increase your chances of winning those duels. If you trigger a duel, you're going to grab a wanted poster. Whenever that pool of wanted posters run out, that is another way that the end game is triggered. And finally, if any player ever loses all their caballeros, all their cowboys, I should say, to death, then they are going to lose. They're going to be, that's going to trigger the end of the game. That's not necessarily going to mean that they lost the game, but that will trigger the end of the game. A player can lose their workers, their cowboys, and potentially that could trigger the end of the game. Really cool, really neat. You're trying to gain as much money as possible by going to all these different places. You're trying to mess with your opponents as many places as possible, and you're trying to time your actions so that you can trigger them when they're most beneficial to you. Really cool. I like the Wild West theme. I like the city building, the fact that you're literally building the city of Deadwood step by step, turn by turn, by adding all these different buildings that help it grow and give more worker placement options. My number 93 board game of all time, Deadwood. And now we move on to my number 92, another game that's not new to the list. It's a tried and true favorite, and it's still hanging in, barely in the top 100, and that is The Lord of the Rings, the original co-op game by Reiner Knizia and published by Fantasy Flight Games. And this game has been on my list for many years. Last year, it was ranked at number 57. So it's dropped even further than Deadwood. And this game here, not too long ago, about a year ago, it recently, Fantasy Flight released a 20th anniversary edition. This game was originally published in the year 2000, right before the films were released, I believe. And this game here, it's just a simple cooperative game, but I really enjoy it. I'm a big fan of Lord of the Rings theme. I'm a big fan of playing the Hobbit characters. Quite often you play Lord of the Ring themed board games and you do not play as the hobbits. More often than not, you're playing as some of the more powerful, attack-oriented, combat-oriented characters. But it's really fun to play as Frodo, to play as Pippin, to play as Samwise, and to go along all of these different player boards that represent different regions or different progressions or chapters in the story of the Lord of the Rings. And as you're progressing, you're trying to make it through there as quick and as efficient as possible while avoiding taking corruption, because you have this main board here where players will start over here and the Sauron character will be placed on the opposite end of the spectrum, and throughout the game the characters, the hobbits, will be gaining corruption, which will advance them on this track, and things will be triggered that will make Sauron move forward on this track as well. If any player ever crosses paths or intersects with Sauron, that player is immediately eliminated. If the ring bearer, because there is Frodo starts the game as the ring bearer, but there is the possibility for the ring to exchange hands several times throughout the game. And if the ring bearer is ever eliminated by intersecting with Sauron, then all of the players lost. If another player is eliminated, then the remaining players can continue. And ultimately, you're trying to make it to the final player board, which is Mordor and Mount Doom. And basically, you're trying to make it to the final spot on that board and roll a die and see if you're able to successfully destroy the one ring. Very simplistic from a mechanical perspective, but I feel like it really does carry that theme and makes me feel like I'm in that scenario. My number 92 board game of all time, The Lord of the Rings, the original co-op game. And now we move on to the last game for today's video, my number 91 board game of all time, and we got another Tiny Epic game, Tiny Epic Zombies. And this game is new to me for this year's list, and another Scott Alms game. I got to admit that I like the theme and the thematic integration, probably a little bit more than the mechanisms, because the mechanisms in this game are very basic. Players are going to create their mall, which will be their board. It's a modular board consisting of all these different stores that make up the mall. And basically, all you're doing, mechanically speaking, is you're taking a couple of movement actions each turn, rolling a die, and seeing if not if you successfully kill a zombie, because every time you make it into a room with a zombie, you're pretty much guaranteed to kill a zombie. You're either going to roll a die to see whether or not you sustain any damage, which will lower your health, or you can use your ranged attack, which allows you to avoid the rolling of the die, but it lowers your ammunition. You have a limited amount of ammunition. And it's really cool because you got this health track and this ammunition track, and they're on the opposite ends of the card. And basically what happens is, as your health progresses, kind of like Lord of the Rings, and your ammunition decreases, if the two numbers ever intersect, then your character is eliminated. And worse over, you flip it over, and that's an additional zombie master with particular special abilities and threats that the players collectively will have to deal with. Now, one really cool thing about this game is that I appreciate the fact that not only does it offer a competitive mode, but it offers a cooperative mode, and it offers a one versus all mode. So you can play this game in so many different ways. So there's lots of variety just from that perspective. There's also tons of characters, very thematic characters that players can take control of, and lots of different objectives, because each game carries 3 objectives that players are trying to complete in a timely fashion while still having some survivors left on their board. And if they're able to do so, they will win the game. But there's a lot of different objectives to pick from when you're choosing which 3 you're going to have in a particular game. Really cool from a thematic perspective. I like everything from the search deck, where players are trying to find different items and weapons that could perhaps help them survive. All the things going on in this game, really cool, really neat. Again, compacted into a small package. My number 91 board game of all time, Tiny Epic Zombies. And that's it for today's list, folks. We are done once again. Please comment down below. Tell me what you think about this particular group of 10 games. Which of these games are among your favorites? Which of these games you're surprised and maybe even disappointed that they made it to my list to begin with? I'm interested in reading what you guys have to say. And don't miss us next Tuesday, as we will be continuing these lists, and we'll be moving on to my numbers 90 through 81 board games of all time. That's it for today, folks. Thank you so much for joining us here at When Harry Met Board Games. This is Harry saying take care, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have fun gaming. Bye-bye.